ideas around the church based on my my culture shock experience. If folks have questions, I'm certainly want to encourage dialogue, and I'll either respond as they come through or hold off to them for a bit. And I gather that they can also, well, as we heard, be gathered and respond to them in a bit of a group. So here we go. So being religious in a spiritual world, navigating the new reality. So I spent 18 years in Whitby, and where we grew the congregation and built a new church building, and I went from there to Toronto. And so it was a culture shock after 18 years, especially in my first year. Part of it was grief at leaving 18 years worth of relationships, the place where my children grew up, the only church that my children knew, and then finding out what it was to be a minister in a very different community. And the gift to me was having all my assumptions challenged. And I went from a place of, let's say, if not certainty, no, we'll say certainty, from certainty to ambiguity, and realizing that the things that I had done where I was before were not going to work the same way in the context where I was existing. And when you've had a ministry of 18 years and you've had a series of events that have gone well, and you feel you sort of have a handle on things, it is humbling. It is really humbling to realize you're back to sort of not quite the beginning, but that you have to reinvent. And one of the things that I found that was different for me where I was in moving from Whitby to Toronto was that it was more of a, for me, it was a new world. And forgive me for stating the obvious, but in Whitby, we were seen as part of the solution. We were very much a place that was in the public square, that politicians in the community saw us as a resource to draw upon, and we had a place. And I got to Toronto and I discovered a much higher level of suspicion, a higher level of feeling that, and resistance to religion, and simply not seeing the church and religion as having A, a place in the public square, or B, particularly anything of enormous value to say or to do or to bring to the table. And so all of a sudden, I went from a place of high visibility to a place of invisibility. Invisibility may be a bit strong, but it was the way what I experienced. However, and again, this is not news to all of you, religion has resistance, spirituality, and the language of spirituality has resonance. So there's a resonance that we have in spiritual language and a resistance to religion. And we are religious. We are religious communities. We are part of a religious tradition, and we live in a world that is increasingly suspicious of that. And so, as I've said, we've gone from being on the inside looking out to being on the outside looking in. And as I've said, no sense that faith communities necessarily bring an inherent value to the well-being of a society. That was my experience. Your experience may be different. And I see apparently I'm frozen. Okay, I'll just keep going. And I also experienced a sense that we were like the private club that are a drain, not a benefit to society, and perhaps we might want to pay property taxes because, after all, what the heck is the church bringing to the community? And those were conversations that I was having. And that was a bit, of a culture shock to me. And so I then had to try and understand, or try and focus on the sense of, well, if we're a religious community living in a world of spirituality, how can we respond? What is it that we can do? So part of it comes from an understanding of what is happening between the religion and the culture. And, we have a culture that emphasizes speed and instant information. That's very much what's happening, I think, in our culture. And religion tends to focus on reflection and prayer and a different style of time. And we live in a culture that responds to constant instant hits, the email, the Facebook, the Twitter, and the text messages. Give you a quick story. I spent this past New Year's Eve, I was visiting my sister in London, England, where she lives, and we had a New Year's Eve dinner party. And during the dinner party, this is New Year's Eve, all right? This is New Year's Eve. During the dinner party, somebody pulled out their BlackBerry and is checking their email at a New Year's Eve dinner party, which is, I think, probably close to my definition of what addiction looks like. And he was not the only person. There was other people were pulling things up, and part of the conversation became YouTube videos that people were showing up on their camera phones or cameras or on their phones and sharing around the table, as well as the hitting of the checking of the email at a New Year's Eve dinner party. This is the culture in which we live in. And an assumption, too, of interactivity and participation as we are experiencing today. I don't know what your worship looks like, but it probably may not have the same type of rhythm as the culture, a rhythm of participatory interactivity consistently all the way through the service. And so we have some sort of cultural adjustments or cultural realities that what I would call is the rhythm and the movement of religion is in a different place than where the culture is right now, from speed and instant information. And I would say that within our culture, and there's lots of wonderful things about our culture, I'm not going doing the finger wag, oh, if only we were back in the good old days, but rather having a sense that if we have speed and instant information, we come from a tradition that has a focus on reflection, and I would also say collective wisdom that rests in a community. So we have this as part of our context. So the church has been trying to respond to these things over the years. So I've been in ministry for 26 years now, and my conclusion after 26 years of ministry is that we've spent a lot of time focusing on the techniques of practice. In other words, if we got the techniques right, then we could solve our problems. If we get the music right, the problem is the hymnody. If our sanctuary is right, if we get the right mission statements or the right theology, clearly, our theology isn't of the time. So we need to make sure our theology is right, or the right practices, or fill in the blank, the right this or the right that. But it tends to be techniques. And I think that that's been our focus. And if we look at the history of the last 25 years, when I began my ministry, and for a large part of it, there was the mecca of Willow Creek. And if we did the seeker thing, if we did the seeker services, and again, that's technique. We create a different style of technique, then maybe we'll have the answer. In terms of how we can speak to the hearts of people, how we can deal with the issues and the issues of the church that all of us are facing. And I've come to believe that it's not the technique, it's rather having an understanding of the tensions that are lying within our culture and our society, and coming up with focusing on strategy in terms of how we communicate what it is to be a religious community and to be part of a religious place, as opposed to trying to come up with techniques to fix the religious place. So that's just some of my sort of opening thoughts of that. And part of it too may be the message that we have unintentionally given. I'm reading a really interesting book, which I will now hold up, called The Idolatry of God by Peter Rollins. And I've never heard of him before. This is a new writer for me and a new book. And so it's The Idolatry of God by Peter Rollins. And he makes a really interesting argument. Part of his argument in his book is that as religious communities, we have essentially sent a message that belief in God is going to fix things in your life. That, you have a hole in your life, or you have an ache in your life, and a religious experience of God is going to provide a complete wholeness and healing. And his argument is, he says, well, essentially we have treated God as a product, and we have made a promise that we cannot keep. Because the reality of life is that there is within each human being an ache and an emptiness, and some of which we can solve, and some of which is sort of an existential part of what it is to be a human being. And that part of the church's job is to communicate a message that God is the companion who walks with us in the midst of the brokenness or the hurt or that existential emptiness, sort of the great separation that happens as part of human development. And what has happened is that people come to church, they hear a message that God is going to fix things, or belief or faith will heal it all. It doesn't happen. They leave disillusioned. They leave even more hurt than when they walked in. So which I think is a very interesting argument, interesting idea, and may have maybe part of, if not the answer, at least part of an interesting discussion around what is the message that we either deliberately or accidentally send. The sort of, not to the extreme of belief in Jesus and all will be well, but rather a sense of that faith is the ultimate answer. Well, maybe not. Maybe we need to understand that our faith is part of the answer of what it is to be a whole human being, but we need to be whole in community and not expect it all to be done. But I am, and in spite of the culture shock, having moments of humility, especially in my first year, very hopeful, based on some experience, not only my experience throughout my ministry, but the last 2.5 years, about what I think we can do and an approach we can take that is not so much on the technique, but on the community and on the relationship and how we communicate what it is to be part of a religious community. So, as I've said, well, cheerfully, we're not dead yet, being a resurrection community. I think it is about rethinking our strategy of how we communicate as a religious people as opposed to the techniques, and re-engaging publicly the gifts of religion. The gifts of community, of worship, of connection, caring for others, and social justice. And to find ways to engage our community. When I talk about our community, I'm not simply speaking internally, but internally and externally. How do we speak to those outside of our doors and our walls? How do we speak to the people in the wider community so that we can be part of the public square as a religious community? And I think it's really important for us as a religious community to be part of the public square again, because we have things that are important to say in terms of our tradition, our history, our focus on community, social justice, children, youth, the healing of a society. I think we have importantly vital things, and I say to everybody what I say all the time is that I honestly believe that a central part of who we are is about saving human lives. That the church is, the work of the church is saving human lives. And when I think of the people in my congregations over my ministry, that we have done that and that we continue to do that. And I think it's so important. I just think we have such a tremendous gift, and I could go on and on, but I won't. Which is why I'm continuing to be filled with hope, because I think our congregations are our best asset. It used to be, and for a large part of my experience, that we sort of felt that if we got the music right, or again you did a good worship service with good preaching and good decent music and a nice sense of community, that the leadership of the church was that primary communicator of the gospel. I don't believe that anymore. I think that as ministers, as clergy, we have a vitally important role as communicators. But I think, and I'm rethinking this as we are over just in the last few weeks, that our congregations are fundamental to a refocus of how we communicate the religious life and how we train and equip our churches, our congregants, our communities, to be able to communicate and speak the language of faith themselves is absolutely incredibly important for the future of the church. So it's always good to admit when you're wrong, and I have many times when I can say I was wrong over the history of my ministry. But one of the places where I was wrong was that I believed up until the last 2 years that that as a religious person, that there was a way of not redeeming the language of religion, but speaking the language of religion in a way that would connect automatically with a wider community. Instead, I've now come to accept that I need to speak the language of spirituality if we are going to resonate with the culture, but use the language of spirituality as that entry point. That's the entry point to us to share what it is to be a religious community. That spirituality is the way in for us to speak about religion, and we have such a rich spiritual tradition. In fact, I would argue that everything that we do connects to a human being's spirituality, from our music, our worship, the way that we have of outreach, that it is a deeply spiritual experience. Religion, as we know, is to bind. So how do we then, using a language of spirituality as a way to share what it is to be part of a religious community, how do we share that understanding of religion to bind together, to bind us together? So one of the things we've done at Fairlawn is engaged in what we've called the Identity Project. I wrote in the Observer, it would have been about a year and change ago, I think, about our branding exercise. And we've expanded that into what we've called the Identity Project. And our research has shown some very important things to us, both our internal research with our own congregants and our external focus groups that we ran with the wider community. Have shown us that people are looking for community and an opportunity to make a positive change in the world. That this is really important. The search for community, we found that people, and we did demographic breakdowns. In other words, we looked at sort of the young family age, the people in their 30s with young children, and then we looked at the baby boomer demographic. So people who are approaching retirement, who have done the bulk of their the work in their careers, and are now sort of in the third stage, and wanting to know if they can have a good third stage, and what does a good third stage for someone who is retiring look like. And they have all sorts of gifts, but they want to continue to be engaged and make a positive change in the world, as do the young adults. And the young adults, that sense of searching for community, meeting people with similar dreams and values to work with them to make the world a better place, was something that all generations shared in common. And that's been very important to us in terms of how we've understood the way that we can communicate to the community. And so our focus has been on creating opportunities that combine both religion and spirituality. And by that I mean that we can use a language of spirituality to explain what we are doing, but then draw people in so that we can then share the language of what it is to be part of a faith community, and how then we can open that out to the doors based on the research that we experienced in our identity project. So I want to share a couple of things that we are trying right now and that I think have been successful. So we did something really simple. It really isn't complex. I really believe in simplicity. So this Christmas, this Advent, we did a community pageant. And the basic premise of this was incredibly simple. Show up. We'll give your child a costume. We will create the pageant around those who were there. And we will simply tell the story of the birth of Jesus. Now, we advertised that very widely in the community. We created a really snazzy little postcard that one of our people in our communications team was able to put together. We sent it out, and we used word of mouth. And we learned something really interesting. And the schools in our area and in Durham region where I live, and in Toronto where I work, sort of break out in hives when the word religion or trying to have anything from a church advertised. They just won't touch it with a 20-foot barge pole. But since we positioned this as a community pageant and had the word community as opposed to church service, they said, oh yeah, no, we'll absolutely advertise that. So we expected, I think when we began planning, we thought, well, maybe we'll get like 20 people. If we get 20 people, we'll be thrilled. We'll just be over the moon if we get 20 people. We had over 100, and about 80 people stayed for the potluck afterwards. And it met this fundamental need. It met the need of people who are seeking meaning about Christmas, that they have an inner deep sense that they want more out of Christmas than Santa and presents. And what this then did was, it was because we framed it as a community pageant that we used a lot of word of mouth, asked people to invite their friends, made it on a Saturday afternoon, a non-traditional church time. I think it was 4 o'clock we ran it with, again, the food afterwards. It meant that people felt very comfortable inviting their friends and neighbors, and also their families. Again, I don't know what your experience is, but very often we'll have older folks in our congregation, well, older folks, people my age, yeah, who have families who haven't been in church for a while, or grandchildren who haven't been in a church for a while, and it was an opportunity for them to bring them back. In a way that was non-threatening, that was fun, engaging, interactive, spoke again, the language of the culture, because it had a high level of interactivity. Just show up, get a costume, come in. We don't care your age, children, adults, everybody came in, and it worked. It was just beautifully successful, and we had far more than the group that I term the usual suspects. The usual suspects are those wonderful, faithful saints who, if we have a Bible study, arrive. And God love and bless them all, because I certainly count on them. But we had far, far beyond the usual suspects, people who don't come to church, people from the wider community, friends and neighbors. I highly recommend something of this nature. Again, widely advertised and word of mouth. Again, coming back to, to share the story of a religious community. It's the congregation who is the messenger. It's not if you build it, they will come, or if you hold it, they will come. It's if your congregation is telling the story and inviting them, then they will come. And as I said, interactive, participatory, and the potluck after. We gather around the table and worship at communion. Food makes everything better. And anytime there's food, they will come. And we kept it, again, simple, because assume that nobody knows the story. in a wider community, and they have an interest in our story. We know our story, it's nothing new to us, but people are fascinated because they have sort of a rough idea about it, but they're really interested to have an opportunity to enter into the story, be part of the story. And it's really helpful for them and for us to understand the gift that our story is that sometimes we forget. Not simply because of familiarity, but because sometimes in the church it feels like we're pushing a rock up a hill. So yes, absolutely intergenerational completely. So what we're doing in 2 weeks is building out of that. Again, I really believe that I want to create a series of events that are what I would call doors open. Just like in Toronto, they have a doors open events for historic buildings and places of interest that they run usually in the spring. I think we as churches, as religious communities, need to have doors open events that provide an opportunity for people to come in and experience us, help them to overcome some preconceptions or conceptions they may have of us. And so we're doing something, really kind of, not corny is the wrong word, but something very clear, a friends and family service, an open door event that is really using the congregation again as evangelists, as the people who are the primary communicators of the invitation and of the story. And we're positioning it by, it's Mardi Gras, it's February 10th. It's Mardi Gras time, so we're doing a Mardi Gras service. I've had a friend of mine who has a jazz band who is coming to play as well. We're having, again, a potluck afterwards. And we're creating a document that has a glossary of terms because people are going to be coming in and they won't know which way is up or down or what everything means. So we're going to have a glossary of terms about the different elements in the service. And we're going to have an FAQ page that's a takeaway, so the glossary and a frequently asked questions, because people will have questions and we'll try and address them early on. And people have been going out, and this has been the really interesting part, and inviting their friends and their family to this. And I did a dialogue with one of them on Sunday, and it was great because he talked about saying, this is an important part of my life, and I would like you to share this important part of my life on a Sunday morning. And the fellow, his friend, thought about it for a second and said, no, I'm not going to do that. No. But he got back to him and he said, well, I'm going to come now. I'm going to come. But I want you to understand that I'm a vegetarian. So I will come to your church experience, but I want you to be a vegetarian for a week so you can experience a part of my life. So now we have a whole new level of conversations. We have a whole different level of sharing, and we've positioned this now as an opportunity not simply to tell our story, but to hear other people's stories and to deepen the relationships that our congregation has with their friends and their extended family. So I think it's going to be a really interesting experience. People are really getting behind this, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how it goes. And again, I focus, and maybe the word, evangelism is the E word in the United Church. Maybe we need another term. I don't know. Sharing the story, whatever you wish to use, but it's the congregation being the primary locus of the invitation and the conversation. And that, I think, is a refocusing of our work as a religious community. So let me share two other things that are also important. So one of the things I found so I'm going to respond to Ruth Sword's question about absolutely. For instance, I think that we have tremendous opportunity, if I was, so just off the top of my head, let's say we did an event, a family event around parenting, around dealing with aging parents, around familial relationships. We created a series of workshops, and part of the way we focused that was the story of the prodigal child, the prodigal son, the prodigal father, however you want to call that story, because that's a glorious story that resonates with all of us within human families, because we've all been the elder, we've all who has been judgmental and a bit of a prig. We've all been the younger sibling, risk-taking, foolish, doing things that they shouldn't, and we've also, but also recognizing what they need to do, and also been the loving and forgiving parent. We've all played those different roles within our lifetime, and that make a wonderful sort of central piece that could be the story that sort of connects the different pieces of an event around family systems, parenting, aging parents, that sort of things. Again, it's using the story of our religious traditions, the stories of Jesus, as a gift. So let me cycle back to something else that I've been a part of in the last year. I believe so strongly that it's important for us as members of religious communities, of faith communities, of churches, to connect with our government, our municipal government, our federal government, our MP, our members of provincial parliament, MLAs, whatever they're called, and to engage them in conversation and ways that we can work together for the common good, and not simply our other governments, but other faith traditions, be interdenominationally, but also interfaith. So when I came to Toronto, one of the things I realized was this sort of sense of invisibility and disconnection between ourselves and our political our political representatives. And so one of the places I started was with our local city councilor, and I went to her and I said, I went down to City Hall, booked an appointment with her, walked in the door, just said, hi, my name is, I'm on the staff at Fairlawn Avenue United Church. I'm the minister there. I'm new to Toronto, but I really want to see, how can we as a church help? Toronto's facing lots of challenges. How can we help? What is it that we as a church could do? And she looked at me and she said, no church has ever asked me that before. I should have been, I need to think about this, because no church has ever asked me that in my community before. And that tells me something that about, if we're talking Jesus stories, let's talk about hiding our light under a bushel, because she was really happy that I came. So out of this became a project that we're calling Faith in the City. And out of that conversation began other conversations. Conversations with Brent Hawks from Metropolitan Community Church here in Toronto, and has deep roots in the city, and conversations with him and some other faith communities. And so we've created Faith in the City, which launched last week with our opening conference. And Faith in the City is a gathering of interfaith leaders, interdenominationally, interfaith leaders from across the city of Toronto, and members of congregations, and counselors and staff from the city of Toronto. And the website is up, and you can take a look at, we're going to have a lot more on it, but at least it gives you a sense of what it is. And Faith in the City was an all-day conference. We did workshops on homelessness, on refugees, disadvantaged youth, after school programs, and we expected, when we started this, we hoped if we get like 40, 60 people, that'd be fantastic. Well, we had like 332 people registered. Now, 332 didn't show up, but a lot of them did. And we held it in the City Council chamber itself of the City of Toronto, which was tremendously significant. Holding an event of faith communities, interfaith, with the City of Toronto. Workshops led by faith leaders and a staff from the City of Toronto, and counselors there as well. And this is an example, excuse me, that's my phone, which I'm now going to lift up and hang up. It was a wonderful public example of how faith communities are working together with the City of Toronto on common concerns. And it modeled something, because I think in our society now, it is critically important that the citizens of a society see the different faith communities working together, being visible, being in public together, being committed to the common good. And I think it's an important model. And so this was the easy part, which was the conference, and the harder part now is to create a sustainable movement or a sustainable organization coming forward. But we had such positive, people had a very positive experience. We got tons of feedback, and I think we have an opportunity now to create this as an ongoing movement in the City of Toronto. And it doesn't matter where you are in Canada. This is the type of event that can be arranged anywhere, any size municipality. Every place has issues, no matter where we live in this country, no matter whether we're in the city, in the suburbs, in the country, in an isolated rural area. There are always issues. There's always a level of municipal government or provincial government or federal government. There's always an opportunity to engage to engage these people in saying, how can we help? How can we help work together, regardless of our political differences or how we view each other politically, but how is it that we can work together on those issues of common concern, from unemployment to immigration, refugees, name the issue where you live. And I think this was an opportunity. And again, I commend it to you. I would love to see events like these in different places, because it allows us to speak a religious language in a public setting, and a symbol of religion that is acting in a loving and proactive way for the healing of the wounds that our society bears. So that's Faith in the City. So this, excuse me, I'm just going to take a slurp here. So the next thing, we're in Lent. I see some things talking about birth and death, and yes, birth and death seems to have a lot to do with Easter. So how do we live out those parts of the religious story that are confusing not only to the general public, but to our own people? People get Christmas. It's they kind of get Christmas. I mean, we're sort of, every year you get that wonderful debate somewhere about the tension between the secular and the sacred in Christmas. But they kind of get the basics of Christmas. But the whole Lent thing now is just a confusion. We even had we had a meeting this past week around, we run Messy Church, which is something else I commend. We've done this now for the past year, and it's been a really wonderful program. But again, new to the church people who came in through the Messy Church program, who are part of our team there, unsure what Lent means, unsure what, are they supposed to give up chocolate? Is that it? somebody said, do we need to give up sex? Is that part of Lent, and no sex for 40 days? Is that part of it? You know, no alcohol, no something. And so there's sort of a general confusion and unease, and we kind of want to sort of skip it off and hop over to Easter. I was up at Staples today, and the Easter eggs are out, even at Staples. You know, Staples has lots of bunnies and lots of eggs. But maybe we can provide an opportunity for people to have an experience of Lent that allows them again to engage friends, neighbors, and themselves. And this one is, I didn't invent this. This was brought to my attention by my colleague Jeff Doucette, who's currently in Pickering from my congregation in Whitby. Wonderful man, former Catholic priest, now in the United Church Ministry. And 40 Acts is essentially doing 40 acts of generosity in Lent. And you log onto the website, you'll get emails every day, you'll see there's a calendar, and there will be activities, or there'll be a sort of a challenge of something to do that is an act of generosity over 40 days. You know, maybe it's be a listener. There's a great video. If you go on the website, you'll see a video where a guy is going into a public space, a public square in England, and he's got a couch, and he's got a giant blackboard that he's written on it, "I will listen. I will listen." So he sits on this couch in the square in England holding up this sign, "I will listen." And people come and talk, and he listens. And so there's a whole series of 40 days of 40 acts that and a set for children. So instead of, again, you know, giving up the chocolate or other things, it's about adding value. There's a term I need to really purge from my lexicon, but it's about adding experience and creating Lent as a participatory, interactive event that engages a congregation and is outward focused, taking the story of Lent and having an understanding of what it is to live in Lent by acting in generosity to our neighbors, to our wider community as members of the church. And what Jeff did last year was they had a congregational board at the front of the church, and people wrote out what they had done. You know, not everybody did all 40. I'm not sure I can do all 40. But they wrote out the things that they had done and how it had affected them. And it was a wonderful way of building a sense of community and momentum to Easter, and seeing Easter as a real celebration of the actions of the previous 40 days, and understanding that having an enhanced understanding of resurrection that I think brings it to life. So I commend that to you. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to try and do something that is a little unique. And it doesn't matter if your neighbor church does it. It doesn't matter if we all do it. I mean, just imagine that if we all did it. Oh my gosh, I'm just thinking about this. You know, we got, holy smoke, you know, we got the United Church, the Catholics, the Anglicans, all of us together doing this. Imagine that as a model to take out to our community. Now I'm thinking, gee, maybe I need to connect to my neighbors here, and maybe we could do this as a community event. Anyway, sorry. So that's just some thoughts of things that we are doing that I think is an opportunity for us to share our religious story. I really believe that as religious communities, it's engaging, and that to me is engaging in conversation, engaging in dialogue, and creating opportunities to engage our community and each other. I think as well that we really need to be authentic, but we also need to teach our people to be comfortable speaking the language of faith. I've just wrapped up a preaching series on the Marcus Borg book, Speaking Christian, and basically trying to equip the congregation to be comfortable to speak about their faith and to understand the terms, redeem the terms, as Borg puts it, of the Christian story in a way that they are comfortable talking about it themselves, so that they have a level of comfort in conversing about their faith. It's really a sense of moving beyond the way of sort of the Christian church, or I'm not going to say the Christian church. I will say the United Church. Of a lot of the United Church experience, where people come in, sort of they get the hour-long inoculation, they go back out into the world, and then they sort of re-engage on that Sunday experience, every week, or once a month, or once a quarter, or a couple of times, or 5 weeks in a row, and then they're gone, whichever. But rather to try and help people live their faith out as religious people outside of the church, having been given the tools within the church, within the congregation, to be able to do that and to have the language that does that. And we have to be authentic to who we are. We shouldn't try and pretend to be something we're not. I think we need to be clear as religious people, as religious community. People can tell if we're not being straight and if we're not being honest. And there is a level of curiosity that is also combined with that resistance that is in the culture. Do not underestimate the amount of genuine, curious, suspicious, interest, especially if your congregation is the one doing the invitation. I've had a number of conversations with folks in my church, and they've asked or invited rather, and people have said, first of all, you go to church? That's funny. I didn't think you were one of those people. Or I thought you were a strong, smart, bright person. I didn't think a strong, smart, bright person goes to church. Huh. And then the wheels turned in this conversation to, hold on a second. You are a smart person, a bright person, a smart person, and you go to church. So maybe there's something in church that I need to take a look at, that maybe it isn't everything that I thought it was. Maybe it's different. And that could only have happened because of the conversation that she had with her friend. It wouldn't have had that changing of the heart or of the mind, or that opportunity never would have come from me at the front of the church on a Sunday morning. It had to come from the person in the congregation. We need to develop a language that resonates. That's my new favorite word. Is what we are doing resonating with the community? Is it have resonance? Is it connecting? Is it something that is going to have a resonance and have a language that does that? And as I said, train your people. We need to train ourselves to feel comfortable talking about their faith and their church and their religious experiences and tradition, and connecting to that, to give our people an opportunity to speak about their deeply spiritual experiences that many people are they are embarrassed to talk about, and don't have a place even necessarily in our churches to have a conversation in a small group or community about the profound spiritual experiences that they have had. I had that experience in Advent when we were doing an Advent series, and it wasn't again, the blessed usual suspects had shown up, but we engaged in another level of conversation around our spiritual experiences, and that took us into a very, very different place. We are constantly a work in progress. The journey metaphor has been utilized to death. Sorry. So I will say that we are constantly work in progress, in the sense of, we are trying to find ways to share our story, build our community, and share the story of our community with a wider audience So you overcome again those conceptions, those preconceptions, excuse me, those stereotypes that people have. I will commend also something that my colleague, friend John Pentland in Calgary at Hillhurst did. He did a course that he ran called Self-Defense for Christians. And he ran that because so many of the new families who were coming to his church were coming and talking to him saying that they were being given a hard time going to church by their friends and family, and they needed to know how could they have a conversation with people. That was really that is to me a symptom or a sign of the work and the challenge that is before us to equip our people to have that sense of confidence. Okay, so there's the end of the PowerPoint. And I'd be very happy if there are any questions at this stage, because I've been talking almost nonstop for just about an hour now. So if there's anything that anybody has or any questions about what we have done, then I'd be very happy to entertain them. And I'll keep okay. All right, I'll let you. You're doing wonderfully. So this has been interesting experience, I have to say. I've enjoyed this, although it is kind of surreal. There's 21 people out there, and I can't see any of you. It's interesting. Sure. Okay. How might you begin to create a space where the blessed usual suspects would feel safe? Okay. I think let me say what happened in that Advent series is that we created an intentional opportunity in terms of reflection that sort of moved from one stage into the other. In other words, we talked about things that were around, your favorite memory of Christmas. What's your favorite memory of Christmas? And then we sort of moved from that space into another place to have another question that sort of led into a deeper place, but starting with something easy in terms of that favorite memory of Christmas, which can trigger other things as well. And I think being clear from the beginning that when you're gathering, that that it is a safe place, that it is confidential what happens here, that it stays within the room, and that there has to be a covenant within all of those people who are gathered, so that people do feel safe doing that. The other piece of it is that I was very clear in terms of sharing a very profound spiritual experience I had, which then gave them a sense of safety and permission to share that. Is that? I hope that's helpful. Okay. Next question. Yes, exactly. Absolutely. Let me give you two, Ruth, let me give you two examples of things that we have done in the last months too, around sort of the movies, books, common discussion points. Last night, about 24 of us went to see Les Mis, which is the God musical. It's all about Les Mis. I love that. Oh my gosh, I love that. Russell Crowe cannot sing to save his life, but the movie was wonderful. So that was what we did last night, but 24 of us gathered there, went to the movies, and then next week we are going to gather and tie it into the movie to the biblical story and to talk about redemption. The other thing we did, and that I think again creates theology here. The other thing that we did in the fall that I really liked was we went to the Art Gallery of Ontario. I called the Art Gallery and I said, can you put together a tour for us of pictures that are not only religious but have a spiritual message? And so we had like 40 people from our congregation troop on down on a weeknight to the Art Gallery of Ontario, and we went through and they showed us a wonderful religious paintings, some that went back to the Middle Ages, and then some modern art that was profoundly spiritual. and it was really rich. It was a rich, rich experience, and they were thrilled. By the way, the Art Gallery of Ontario was thrilled to have a church group come to them and arrange this. This was, again, something new for them. It hadn't happened. And so we're going back. There's I want to try and develop a relationship with the art gallery, and there are galleries everywhere within some urban area. And if you don't have an art gallery close by, then connect by distance and use do pictures, create a PowerPoint presentation of art. Skype in and maybe bring in a curator on Skype, something like that. If you're in a place that's not near to a gallery, talk to a major gallery and say, this is where we are. Can you help us? And you'll be amazed at how much they'd like to be part of that conversation. And it was a fascinating tour and experience. And as I say, we're going back this spring. There's a Renaissance art. Oops, there I disappeared again. There's a Renaissance art special presentation that they're doing that I would like us to be a part of. Yes, I'd be very happy to send you a book. I would be thrilled to do that. Somebody actually asked me recently, are you going to be doing, is there another book you're going to write? For the last 2.5 years, I've said, well, 3.5 years actually, since my last year at Westminster, I said no because I didn't have anything to say. I had nothing to say. I needed to really engage where I was and try and learn. There were things I needed to learn before I could say anything. And I'm not at the point where I'm going to be writing another book yet, but I'm at the point where I'm now thinking I can start to think about the things that maybe I would like to say that I have learned, that my congregation and my experience has taught me. And so I think I'll be able to maybe do some
Hi, Chris. Can you all hear me?
That. Okay, so I see we're sort of gathering up
Sometimes
to 8:59.
Okay, good. We've got some raised hands. Sometimes
Josephine,
I have trouble
if
when I
there's
sign
any
back
sort of
on
wrap up,
technically.
it's now 9 o'clock.
Anyway,
if there's
Chris,
any
I do want to
wrap-up
thank
that
you
we
so
do
much
here.
for your presentation. I do have a quick question here from Brenda that I've posted for you. I don't know if you can respond to that briefly before we sign off.
Oh, thank you. Sure, absolutely. Hold on a sec. Ha. Um, good question. So my experience, the mystics and I, that's not my gift or strength. That sort of mystical side of Christianity in one sense isn't my greatest thing. So other folks within my congregation have had that experience, and there's actually a women's spirituality group and a prayer group that that has been the language that they have been comfortable using. I need to do some reading, clearly, and raise my own experience in that. And it's so. I'll learn some more. Thank you for those names. I need to do some work myself.
Well, Chris, thank you very much, and thank all of you for joining us.
Well, I just want to say you're welcome to the Habs fan in Quebec. I hope that I wasn't. If I'd known you were a Habs fan, I would be wearing my Maple Leafs jersey for this event, but probably just as well I didn't.
Thank you for that. And I know through the conversation that we've been inspired to share some of our own stories as well. Just a couple of reminders as we sign off. This webinar has been recorded and will be available approximately a week following the webinar, and that will be mailed to you. Next week we have a webinar coming up with Chad Myers on planning for Lent. So thinking
That's
about
great. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure
coming up in Lent, which will soon be upon us. And finally, as we close off the webinar, I will direct you to a screen that will ask for your feedback with 3 quick polls to get your feedback. And Chris, you do have something to say, so I'll let you say that.
Well, I'm just for Lent. I'm having fun. Yeah, again. I wish this is not my own idea. I got it from my buddy John Pentland in Calgary. I'm doing a series of sermons on the
Well,
seven
thanks very
deadly
much, Chris, and
sins,
thanks all of
and
you. We hope
lust
to
is
see
week
you
two. I
again.
expect it to be very popular.